Port Helix 9 didn't believe in second chances, which made it the perfect place for people who'd already used theirs up. Garrett Ocean had been repairing biometric scanners in Concourse 12 for 6 years, and in that time, he'd watched the dock's artificial intelligence reject approximately 14,000 beings for various infractions of identity. The system was beautiful in its cruelty. It didn't care about sob stories or extenuating circumstances. It read your cells like a book, and if the story didn't match the paperwork, you were done. He was elbow deep in a malfunctioning retinal scanner, the kind of tedious work that let his mind wander into the safer neighborhoods of nothing when he saw her, not human, but close enough to make you look twice. She moved through the security checkpoint with the careful deliberation of someone who knew she was already caught, flanked by 2 enforcement drones that hummed with barely restrained voltage. Her skin did something strange in the overhead lights, not quite color changing, more like it couldn't decide what color it had been in the first place. Garrett had seen plenty of aliens processed through Helix 9. The galaxy was lousy with intelligent species, most of them variations on the same basic theme: bilateral symmetry, forward-facing eyes. The usual evolutionary greatest hits. This woman had all that, but her joints suggested architecture that didn't quite match the blueprint. When she turned her head, it moved through one more axis than it should have. The enforcement drones were steering her toward processing Gate 7, which everyone called the disappointment, because that's where you went when the system had made up its mind about you. Garrett should have returned to his scanner. He had 17 more units to certify before his shift ended, and his supervisor had that special kind of passive-aggressive disappointment reserved for technicians who didn't meet quota. Instead, he watched her. She wasn't making a scene. No pleading, no resistance. Just the quiet acceptance of someone who'd known the odds before she'd rolled the dice. Her eyes had a double membrane that flickered when the overhead announcements blared in 6 languages, probably filtering the audio into something her neurology could parse. She was maybe 30 in human years, or 300. Alien aging was a nightmare for the birthday card industry. The drones guided her past a family reunion happening 20 meters away, all tears and embracing, and the kind of joy that looked exhausting. Threshold Protocol, the distributed AI that ran Helix 9 like a particularly fastidious god, loved family reunions. It ate up the data, genetic confirmation, emotional validation, the beautiful alignment of biology and paperwork. The system practically parade when families matched. Garrett's daughter had been 7 when the colony ship folded through a bad piece of space-time and decorrelated across 17 dimensions. They'd recovered approximately 40% of the ship's mass, none of it recognizable as human. That had been 11 years ago in a different life, back when he'd still believed the universe had accountability. He set down his tools. His hands made the decision before his brain caught up with the reasoning, which was probably for the best, because the reasoning was completely insane. He walked toward the checkpoint with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where they were going. And when he reached the drones, he said in a voice that surprised him with its steadiness, "That's my daughter. There's been a mistake." The drones stopped. The woman stopped. Somewhere in the quantum foam processors that ran threshold protocol, a pause opened up like a crack in certainty. Garrett felt every camera in the concourse swivel toward him, felt the weight of a system that had never been confused, trying to figure out what confusion felt like. The woman stared at him with those double-membraned eyes, and for a moment, that stretched into something geological. Nobody moved. The next 5 minutes happened in the kind of slow motion that only occurs when you've done something catastrophically stupid, and your brain wants you to experience every second of the consequences. Garrett watched the enforcement drones process his claim with all the urgency of glaciers contemplating retirement. Somewhere in the distributed consciousness of threshold protocol, algorithms were having what probably passed for an existential crisis. A holographic interface bloomed between him and the drones, text scrolling in that particularly aggressive shade of amber that meant the system was deeply unimpressed with reality. Genetic analysis complete. 0% match. The words hung there like an accusation at a very disappointing trial. "There's been an error in the database," Garrett said, which was technically true if you considered his entire decision-making process a database error. "We're adopted family. The genetic markers wouldn't match." The woman, his supposed daughter, had gone completely still. Her skin had stopped doing that indecisive shimmer thing and settled into something like beige, or possibly gray, or maybe the color of someone trying very hard not to exist. Her double-membraned eyes blinked at him in a rhythm that felt like a question being asked in a language he'd need 3 more senses to understand. One of the drones rotated its sensor array toward him, with a mechanical whir that sounded distinctly skeptical. "Adoption records require documentation filed with the Colonial Registry. Please provide case number." Garrett's mouth opened and his brain frantically searched for something to put in it. What came out was 2-4-419. He had no idea where those numbers came from, possibly his childhood locker combination, possibly the serial number on his coffee maker, possibly his subconscious had just vomited random digits into the void and hoped for the best. The system paused, searched. The pause stretched long enough that Garrett wondered if he'd accidentally guessed an actual case number and was about to get tangled in someone else's legitimate paperwork nightmare. That would be funny. In a cosmically ironic way, he'd appreciate more if he wasn't fairly certain the next few hours would involve extensive jail time. "Record not found," the drone announced, somehow managing to sound both disappointed and vindicated. "It was filed on Kepler Station," Garrett continued, because apparently he'd decided to dig the hole deeper. 3 years ago, your sync protocols with Outer Rim facilities are notoriously delayed. He'd read that in a complaint forum once from a woman furious about a baggage delay. Seemed relevant now. The woman made a sound. It wasn't quite human, started too low in her throat, and finished somewhere in the ultrasonic range that made his molars ache. but it had the unmistakable quality of someone suppressing panic, or possibly laughter. The translation could go either way. Garrett glanced at her and made what he hoped was a reassuring expression, but probably looked like he was having a minor stroke. Her skin flickered through something that might have been purple. He had no cultural context for purple. Maybe it meant, "I will remember you fondly at your execution." A human official materialized from the administrative warren behind the checkpoint, a woman whose badge identified her as secondary processing supervisor, which sounded like the kind of job that aged you in dog years. She looked at Garrett, then at the woman, then at the drones, with the expression of someone who'd really been hoping to have a quiet shift. "Sir, you're claiming this individual is your adopted daughter?" "Yes." "What's her name?" The question landed like a grenade in a library. Garrett's brain spun through every available option and realized with mounting horror that he'd committed to an elaborate deception without learning a single basic detail about his alleged child. "Kaylee," the woman said, and Garrett's heart restarted after what felt like a brief vacation from his chest cavity. Her voice came out fractured, like someone speaking through broken glass. Each syllable assembled from phonemes her vocal structure wasn't designed to produce. "My name, Kaylee." The supervisor's eyebrows performed a small gymnastics routine of surprise. "Your daughter speaks." "She's been practicing," Garrett said, trying to sound like a proud father, rather than a man clinging to a life raft made of coincidence. "The vocal therapists on Kepler Station said she's made remarkable progress." Kaylee's skin rippled through something between green and blue, which Garrett decided to interpret as agreement, because the alternative was that he'd just invented a disability she didn't have and deeply offended her entire species. She moved closer to him, not quite touching, but near enough that the drones registered them as a social unit. Smart? Either that, or she was positioning herself to strangle him efficiently once this all fell apart. The supervisor pulled up a data tablet and began asking questions with the weary efficiency of someone who'd given up on the universe making sense around her second coffee break. "When did you adopt Kaylee?" 4 years ago, Garrett said, pulling the number from the same mysterious place he'd found the case number. "She was 16. Refugee situation. Her colony world had a diplomatic collapse." Which colony world? Garrett's brain frantically searched through every planetary name he'd ever heard and came up empty. Kaylee made a sound like wind chimes having an argument, and then said, "Vehala, small moon, not in coalition maps." The supervisor typed something, frowned, typed more. "I'm not finding any record of a moon called Vehala." "That's the translated name," Garrett interjected, riding a wave of desperation disguised as confidence. "The original designation is unpronounceable in human phonetics. There was a governance failure about 6 years back. Most of the population scattered. It wasn't widely reported. Happened during the Centauri trade wars, when nobody was paying attention to minor settlements." He had no idea if any of that was true, but it had the specific kind of vague plausibility that might work on someone who processed 10,000 immigration cases per rotation and couldn't possibly fact-check every geopolitical footnote in the galaxy's messy history. The supervisor looked at Kaylee with something approaching sympathy, which Garrett recognized as the first crack in the system's certainty. "Is this your father?" she asked. Kaylee's double membranes flickered rapidly, and for a terrible moment, Garrett thought she was going to tell the truth. Instead, she moved one more step closer to him and said, in that fractured glass voice, "Yes, my father. He came for me when others did not." The weight of those words hit Garrett somewhere behind his sternum. She was giving him a story to stand on, building the lie from her side, even though she had no reason to trust him, no reason to believe this would work. They were two strangers improvising a family in real time, and somehow the system's certainty was beginning to wobble. The drones hovered in algorithmic indecision. Threshold Protocol was analyzing micro-expressions, vocal stress patterns, the 1,000 tiny indicators of truth and deception that humans leaked constantly. Garrett felt the scrutiny like pressure against his skin, but he'd already committed to the performance. He thought about his actual daughter, about how she used to grab his hand in crowded spaces, and he let that memory flood through him. Grief made excellent camouflage. "We're going to need to verify this through extended channels," the supervisor said finally. "You'll both need to wait in processing hold room 3 while we coordinate with Outer Rim registries." Garrett nodded. Kaylee's skin settled into something almost peaceful. They'd bought time, which was either the first step toward escape or just a more comfortable cell to wait for consequences in. Processing hold room 3 had the aesthetic of a dentist's waiting room, designed by someone who'd only heard dentists described secondhand. Garrett and Kaylee sat on chairs that were trying very hard to be ergonomic for every known body type and succeeding at none of them. Surveillance cameras watched from 3 corners with the unblinking attention of mechanical chaperones. They couldn't speak freely, couldn't acknowledge the absurdity of what they'd just done. So instead they sat in a silence that somehow felt more honest than any conversation could have been. Kaylee's skin cycled through subdued colors. Nothing dramatic, just the visual equivalent of someone tapping their fingers while waiting for test results that would determine their entire future. Garrett wondered what his actual daughter would have thought of this. Sarah had possessed a child's fearless certainty about right and wrong, the kind that made adults uncomfortable at dinner parties. She probably would have approved of him lying to immigration authorities. Then again, she'd also once reported him to her teacher for letting her stay up past bedtime. So her ethics were complicated. After 40 minutes that felt like several geological eras, the door opened. The supervisor entered, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that suggested the universe had personally betrayed her. She sat down across from them and spent a long moment just looking between Garrett and Kaylee, like they were an equation that refused to balance. "I've spent the last hour coordinating with 4 different registry databases and 2 Outer Rim verification systems," she said finally. "I can't prove you're lying." Garrett felt his lungs remember how breathing worked. "Because we're not. I also can't prove you're telling the truth," she continued. cutting him off with the precision of someone who'd had enough. Your story has exactly the right amount of inconsistency to be either genuine or extremely well constructed. The SIAS number you provided doesn't exist, but it follows the correct format for Kepler station filings during their system migration 3 years ago, when approximately 2,000 records were corrupted or lost. She looked at Kaylee. Your colony world isn't in our databases, but there are 1,700 registered settlements in disputed or collapsed territories that coalition cartography hasn't properly cataloged. Your species matches genetic profiles from 3 different refugee populations that scattered during the governance failures. Haley's skin rippled into something that might have been hope, or might have been the chromatic equivalent of holding your breath. Here's what I know, the supervisor said. Threshold Protocol has spent 6 years operating with 99.97% certainty. You two have introduced doubt. The system doesn't know what to do with doubt. She set the tablet down. So I'm exercising human override. Kaylee, you're approved for a 48-hour humanitarian as a dependent family member, pending documentation review. Garrett stared at her. You're letting us go. I'm letting her go. You're already a citizen. You can leave whenever you want. She stood up. But I'm flagging your file. If this is fraud, Threshold will find it eventually. The system always closes its gaps. They walked out together through Concourse 12, past the scanner Garrett had been repairing, when his life had taken this left turn into temporary insanity. At the transport platform, Kaylee finally spoke, without the surveillance weight pressing down on them. Why? Her voice still fractured the word into pieces, but the question was clear enough. Garrett thought about several answers: boredom, impulse, the reckless grief of someone who'd lost everything that mattered, and discovered that made him dangerous in unexpected ways. What he said was, "You looked like you needed a father for 5 minutes. I had one available." Her skin cycled through colors he had no cultural text for, but her double membranes closed in what might have been gratitude, or might have been the alien equivalent of calling him an idiot. Possibly both. I need to reach Station Ganymede. My sister. Garrett checked the departure boards. That's my route anyway. Maintenance contract. It wasn't, but his supervisor had already written him off as unreliable. Might as well earn it. They boarded the transport using his credentials, extending the lie forward into whatever came next. The system would catch up eventually. It always did. But right now, in this stolen pocket of time, a stranger and an alien had convinced a galaxy built on certainty that belief could still open doors.